The fluorescent lights of the stairwell hummed with a sickly vibration that matched the trembling in Brielle's hands as she pressed the phone harder against her ear. The voicemail from the hospital was static-filled and brief, but the words cardiac arrest and immediate surgery cut through the white noise like a serrated blade, leaving her gasping for air in the concrete box. 2 floors below, the newsroom was a chaotic beast of ringing phones and shouting producers, but up here, in the shadow of the empire that employed her, she felt terrifyingly small. Her eyes burned with tears she refused to shed, knowing that a single missed shift could mean losing the probationary position that was the only thing keeping her aunt alive. Outside the building, the city was unaware of her crumbling world, but across town, Kieran Holt stood in the cold, damp air of the subway tunnel, his wrists bound by cold steel. Commuters with their smartphones raised like weapons filmed him, their jeers bouncing off the tiled walls as the police officers shoved him against the dirty maintenance gate. He didn't struggle, his gaze fixed on a point in the distance, hiding the sharp, calculating mind that was already cataloging every mistake they had made. A grease stain on his cheek and a rip in his cheap work jacket marked him as just another disposable cog in the machine, easy to blame and easier to forget. Brielle and Kieran had never met, yet in this single night of crisis, their fates were being violently stitched together by invisible threads of power and deceit. This is not just a story about a fall from grace, but about the shattering of a reality built on lies. Watch closely as the truth begins to fracture, because nothing is ever as it seems when the powerful play their games. The red breaking news light spun above the newsroom floor, bathing the chaos in a hellish glow that demanded attention and drained souls simultaneously. Brielle burst through the stairwell door, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird desperate to escape its cage. The voicemail looped in her mind, a terrifying soundtrack of beeps and a doctor's monotone voice explaining the costs of life. She needed an advance, a break, a miracle, but looking at the floor, she saw only sharks circling a bleeding prey. Conrad Ashbourne stood at the center of the room, his silhouette framed by the massive screens broadcasting a city on fire. He held court with a glass of scotch in hand, looking like a king amused by the suffering of his subjects. Brielle knew she had to approach him, even though every instinct screamed that walking into his orbit was dangerous. She moved through the rows of desks, dodging producers and interns, feeling the weight of her probationary status like a target. Auntie May is stable, but they need the deposit now, she whispered to herself, a mantra to keep the panic at bay. The debt was a mountain she had been climbing for years, and tonight, it threatened to crush her completely. She reached the edge of the central hub, watching Conrad laugh at something a senior anchor said, the sound cold and sharp. The distance between his world and hers felt infinite, a chasm filled with expensive suits and unpaid bills. She took a breath, steadying herself, knowing that vulnerability was the only currency she had left to spend. Would he see a dedicated employee or just another liability on his immaculate balance sheet? The news cycle didn't care about her personal tragedy, it only cared about the next big headline. Brielle stepped forward, her voice trembling as she interrupted his conversation, unaware that she was sealing her fate. "Mr. Ashbourne, I need to speak with you urgently," she said, the words feeling like stones in her throat. He turned slowly, his eyes scanning her face, looking for the weakness he could exploit later. The breaking news banner flashed, but for Brielle, the real disaster was just beginning to unfold. Could she really trust the man who built his fortune on the ruins of other people's lives? The phone in her pocket vibrated again, a silent reminder that time was running out. The handcuffs bit into Kieran's wrists, metal teeth gnawing at skin that had known years of hard labor and rough treatment. He stood silently against the gate, surrounded by officers who spoke to him with the disdain reserved for vermin. The crowd of commuters shouted insults, their faces distorted by the blue light of their recording phones. "Sabotage," the shift supervisor spat, pointing a finger at Kieran as if casting a demonic spell. "You cut the brake lines, Holt. You wanted to bring the city to its knees just because you're bitter." Kieran didn't flinch, his eyes drifting to the dark mouth of the tunnel where the train had derailed. He knew the topology of these tunnels better than he knew the lines on his own palms. The brake line hadn't been cut, it had corroded, a fact he had logged in 3 separate reports over the last month. Those reports were currently sitting in a drawer, ignored by the very man now accusing him of terrorism. It was a classic setup, a sacrifice offered to the altar of public panic to hide years of negligence. He looked at the supervisor, seeing the sweat beading on the man's forehead, smelling the fear. If you go down for this, we all go down, Kieran thought, remembering the ledger he kept hidden at home. The crowd surged forward, eager for a confession, a villain to blame for the morning's chaos. Kieran remained a stone wall, his silence a louder defense than any shouted denial could ever be. He felt the vibration of the tunnel, a subtle reminder that the city was a living, breathing beast. They saw a janitor, a failure, a nobody with grease under his fingernails and cheap boots on his feet. They didn't see the man who remembered every serial number, every date, and every bribe paid in the shadows. An officer shoved him toward the transport van, his face twisted in a cruel smile. "Enjoy your time in the hole, rat," the officer whispered, closing the door on the scene. As the van moved, Kieran closed his eyes, reconstructing the night in his mind. Who had benefited from the derailment, and who had the most to lose if the truth came out? The darkness of the van offered no answers, only the cold realization that he was alone. But in his pocket, his phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. "Stay quiet. The game is just starting." Was this a threat, or was it the lifeline he desperately needed to survive the night? Conrad Ashbourne led Brielle into his glass-walled office, a sanctuary of silence high above the newsroom floor. The city lights sparkled below them, a beautiful illusion that masked the grime and desperation of the streets. He sat behind a desk made of mahogany, a fortress of power that separated the gods from the mortals. "I hear your aunt is in the ICU, Conrad said, his voice smooth, lacking any genuine warmth or concern. Brielle felt her throat tighten, the invasion of her privacy striking her harder than a physical blow. "Yes, sir. It's critical. I need an advance on my salary to cover the initial procedures." She stood with her hands clasped behind her back, fighting the urge to beg for his mercy. Conrad opened a drawer, retrieving a thin file that he placed on the desk with deliberate slowness. He didn't open it, just let his hand rest on it, a silent threat of the knowledge he possessed. "I know everything about my employees, Brielle. Their strengths, their weaknesses, their debts." He tapped the file, the sound echoing in the quiet room like a gavel striking a sound block. "Your aunt's hospital bills are substantial. And your probationary status means the insurance is minimal." Brielle swallowed hard, the room suddenly feeling too hot, the air too thin to breathe. "I can work extra shifts. I can take on the weekend graveyard editing. I just need time." Conrad smiled, a rehearsed expression that didn't reach his cold, calculating eyes. "Time is the one thing we don't have. The audit is coming, and budgets are being scrutinized." He stood up and walked around the desk, leaning against it so he was towering over her. "I can pay the bills. All of them. I can ensure your aunt gets the best care in the state." Brielle looked up, hope warring with the dread that settled like a stone in her stomach. "Why would you do that for a copy editor on probation?" Conrad reached out, brushing a stray hair from her forehead, his touch possessive and chilling. "Because loyalty is rare, and I like to invest in assets that show potential. But investments require returns, Brielle. Are you willing to do whatever is necessary?" The question hung in the air, heavy with implication and the promise of a compromising future. She looked at the door, then back at him, realizing there was no walking away. Was saving her aunt worth selling her soul to the devil in a designer suit? Conrad slid a piece of paper across the desk, a check with more zeros than she had ever seen. "Sign here as a consultant. It's a private arrangement. Off the books." Her hand trembled as she picked up the pen, the ink feeling like blood on the page. With every stroke of the pen, she felt the chains of his leverage clicking into place. What exactly had she just agreed to, and what would the cost be when he came to collect? The check cleared instantly, a digital transaction that bought Brielle a sense of security she hadn't felt in years. Her aunt was moved to a private suite, a room with windows and a nursing staff that hovered like protective angels. Brielle sat by the bed, watching the older woman sleep, the beeping of the monitors a soothing lullaby. The crisis was averted, but the relief was tainted by the lingering scent of Conrad's cologne. He hadn't asked for anything specific yet, but the request was coming. She could feel it in her bones. Back at the station, the atmosphere shifted whenever she walked into a room. Whispers stopped abruptly, eyes darted away, and the friendly camaraderie evaporated into cold professionalism. She had been marked as Conrad's favorite, a status that offered immunity but invited isolation. "Editorial wants you to look at this packet," a senior producer said, dropping a file on her desk. "It's for the city infrastructure piece. The subway derailment. They need a fresh angle." Brielle opened the folder, expecting the usual police reports and witness statements. Instead, she found a series of internal documents, maintenance logs that seemed incomplete and confusing. Conrad appeared in the doorway of her cubicle, his presence blotting out the fluorescent lights. "Focus on the human error angle, Brielle. The negligence of the workers on the ground." He walked over, resting his hand on her shoulder, a heavy weight that pinned her to the chair. "People need a villain. Give them a disgruntled maintenance worker. It's a story that sells." Brielle looked down at the photo of Kieran Holt clipped to the file, his eyes staring back defiantly. "He claims he filed reports about corrosion," she said, her voice barely a whisper. Conrad's grip tightened, a silent warning that crushed her dissent before it could form. "And who do you think the public will believe? A convicted saboteur or this network?" He leaned down, his breath hot against her ear, the threat disguised as advice. "Remember the suite your aunt is in. Remember who holds the keys to that door." Brielle stared at the photo, feeling a sickening twist in her gut. The protection Conrad offered was a gilded cage, beautiful and comfortable, but impossible to leave. If she wrote the truth, she would lose everything. If she lied, she would destroy a man she didn't know. She touched the photo of Kieran, tracing the line of his jaw, sensing the injustice in his stare. Was she complicit now, a guard in the prison Conrad had built? The screen glowed in front of her, the cursor blinking like a heartbeat waiting to be stopped. She began to type, weaving the narrative Conrad demanded, hating herself with every keystroke. How many lies would she have to tell before she became one of them? The newsroom was quiet in the early morning hours, the hum of servers the only sound in the vast space. Brielle was sifting through the detritus of the day's press packets, looking for any missed detail. Most of it was trash press releases for vanity products and self-aggrandizing op-eds. Her hand brushed against a thick envelope tucked inside a packet from the Transit Authority. It wasn't stamped, addressed, or labeled in any way, just a heavy, cream-colored square of paper. She pulled it out, surprised to find a red wax seal securing the flap, a symbol of archaic secrecy. Curiosity getting the better of her, she broke the seal and unfolded the letter inside. The paper was heavy, the typeface sharp and old-fashioned, lacking the digital sterility of modern memos. To the watcher on the wall, the letter began, the words cryptic and chilling. Brielle frowned, her heart rate picking up pace as she read the first paragraph. The derailment was not an accident, nor was it the act of a lone dissident. It was a deletion. She scanned the room, suddenly paranoid, feeling the weight of the paper in her hands. The letter detailed specific vendor accounts, shell companies, and numbers that matched the transit budget. It mentioned a knight and a king, painting a picture of a chess match played with human lives. At the bottom of the page, a single line was underlined in red ink. The truth lies not in the broken break, but in the ledger of the one who profits. Brielle's hands shook as she realized she was holding a whistleblower file, a bomb. This wasn't just a story, it was a weapon capable of bringing down the entire network. She quickly folded the letter, sliding it into her purse, her eyes darting to the security cameras. If Conrad found out she had this, the protection he offered would turn into a swift and brutal destruction. She looked at the screen where her draft on Kieran Holt sat, the lies glaring back at her. The letter provided the context she needed, but it also put a target on her back. Who had sent this, and why did they choose her to be the bearer of such dangerous truth? The knight mentioned in the letter, could that be Kieran, the silent man in the photo? She needed to verify the claims, but doing so would require accessing records she wasn't supposed to see. The sealed letter was a key, but opening the door it unlocked might kill her. Was she brave enough to use it, or would she let fear silence the whisper of conscience? The annual Media Integrity Gala was a spectacle of diamonds, champagne, and hypocrisy. Brielle stood on the fringe of the ballroom, wearing a dress Conrad had loaned her for the evening. It was backless and red, a statement piece that screamed "look at me" while simultaneously stripping her of armor. She felt exposed, a lamb dressed in silk wandering through a pack of wolves. Conrad was holding court in the center of the room, laughing with politicians and business tycoons. He caught her eye and raised his glass, a signal that she was to join him immediately. She navigated the crowd, forcing a smile as she accepted the hungry gazes of the elite. "This is the young woman who broke the subway story," Conrad announced, presenting her like a trophy. The crowd turned their attention to her, their smiles tight and appraising. She uncovered the negligence that threatened our city. A true journalist. Brielle felt the heat rise in her cheeks, the lie tasting like ash in her mouth. "It was a team effort," she murmured, trying to deflect the praise she didn't deserve. A woman in a severe black suit stepped forward, her eyes sharp and knowing. "Your piece was quite definitive. Especially regarding the maintenance worker, Mr. Holt." The room went silent, the air thick with the anticipation of a kill. "It is my understanding he claims to have filed reports." "Did you see those reports?" Brielle stuttered, caught off guard by the sudden interrogation in the middle of a party. I reviewed the evidence provided by the network," she managed to say. "So you didn't investigate independently? You just typed what you were told?" The woman's voice carried, and heads turned, whispers spreading like wildfire through the room. "Is this what we call integrity now? Slander the poor to protect the stock price?" Conrad's smile didn't waver, but his eyes turned into chips of ice. "Miss Camden is on probation. We are guiding her hand. The story stands." The woman scoffed, turning her back on them in a display of blatant disrespect. "Propaganda, nothing more. You should be ashamed, Miss Camden." The moment broke, and the conversation buzzed again, but the damage was done. Brielle was marked not as a journalist, but as a paid mouthpiece for a corrupt regime. She excused herself, fleeing to the balcony, the cold air hitting her flushed skin. She leaned against the railing, looking down at the city, feeling the walls closing in. How long before she became the next sacrifice on Conrad's altar? The gala continued inside, but for Brielle, the party was over. Kieran sat in the holding cell, the concrete walls closing in with the weight of the city's judgment. He hadn't slept, the adrenaline of the arrest keeping his mind sharp despite the physical exhaustion. He closed his eyes, visualizing the notebook he had hidden beneath a loose floorboard in his apartment. It was a simple, black-bound book, the kind bought in a drugstore for a few dollars. But inside those pages was the DNA of the corruption that ran through the subway system like a cancer. Every log entry, every denied request for repair, every vendor who supplied substandard parts. He remembered the specific entry from 3 months ago: brake pads supplied by Titan Logistics. Failed stress test. He remembered the signature on the approval form C. Ashbourne, a proxy vote on the transit board. The connection was there, a direct line from the greasy tracks to the polished boardroom. He needed to get that information to someone who could use it, someone who wasn't afraid of Conrad. The door to the cell buzzed and opened, a guard standing there with a bored expression. "You have a visitor." "Lawyer, supposedly." Kieran stood up, his instincts screaming that this was a trap or a trick. He was led to a small visitation room, separated by a thick pane of plexiglass. On the other side sat a man he didn't recognize, wearing a cheap suit that didn't fit quite right. The man picked up the phone, and Kieran followed suit, the receiver warm and greasy. "I'm not a lawyer," the man said, his voice low and gravelly. "I'm a friend of the cause." He held up a photo of the notebook, pressing it against the glass. "Safe house. But we need the rest. The numbers don't add up without your notes." Kieran felt a surge of hope mixed with a heavy dose of suspicion. "Who are you working for?" "The truth." "The same thing you're working for, Kieran. The network is bleeding." The man slid a piece of paper under the partition. "A date and a time. We get you out, you get us the book. We burn it all down." Kieran looked at the paper, then at the camera in the corner of the room. If he agreed, he was stepping into a war. If he refused, he rotted in here for a crime he didn't commit. "I need guarantees. My safety, and the safety of the person who helps me." The man nodded, a grim determination settling on his face. "We aren't Conrad. We don't leave our people behind." Kieran hung up the phone, his mind racing with the logistics of the escape. The notebook was the lever, the fulcrum upon which the world would turn. He just had to survive long enough to place it under the heavy weight of the lie. Could he trust a stranger in a cheap suit, or was this just another level of the game? The guard tapped on the glass, signaling time was up. Kieran stood up, his resolve hardening into something unbreakable. He was going to fight back, and he was going to use their own rules against them. The atmosphere in the newsroom shifted from chaotic to funeral parlor quiet in a single morning. External auditors had arrived, a team of grim-faced accountants with secure briefcases and no smiles. They swept through the office like a plague, sealing files and seizing computers with military precision. Conrad watched from his office, his face a mask of calm, but Brielle saw the tick in his jaw. She sat at her desk, her own computer locked, a red audit in progress sticker on the screen. She had the sealed letter in her purse, feeling like it was burning a hole through the leather. The numbers the auditors were pulling were related to the Transit Authority advertising contracts. Massive sums of money had moved between the network and the vendors Kieran had listed. Brielle listened to the whispers of the senior staff as they passed her cubicle. "The slush fund isn't adding up. The dates are wrong. Conrad's going to crucify whoever didn't shred these files." She realized the audit wasn't just routine, it was a purge, a cleanup operation. But it had backfired, or perhaps, someone had forced it to happen. The letter had mentioned a night. Was this the attack from the other side of the board? Her phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. "The king is checking his armor. Stay ready." Brielle looked around, paranoia spiking again. Who was watching her? Conrad walked out of his office, his stride purposeful and angry. He stopped at her desk, his hands resting on the partition, leaning in close. "You know nothing about the discrepancy in the transit logs. Is that clear?" His voice was a low growl, meant only for her ears. "If they ask, you focus on the editorial content, not the finance side." Brielle nodded, her heart pounding against her ribs like a trapped bird. "You're the copy editor, Brielle. You edit words. You don't look at numbers." He straightened up, adjusting his cufflinks, the image of control. "If this audit goes south, you remember who pays for your aunt's medication." He walked away, leaving her trembling in the wake of his threat. The auditors were closing in, and the numbers were telling a story Conrad couldn't spin. The discrepancy was the crack in the dam, and the water was rising fast. Brielle touched her purse, feeling the outline of the sealed letter. She had the proof of the narrative, and the auditors had the proof of the crime. If she could find a way to connect the two, she could bring the whole thing down. But doing so meant walking into the fire and hoping she didn't burn. Was the audit the beginning of the end for Conrad, or just another move in his game? The summon came via email, short and devoid of pleasantries. Conference room B. Now. Brielle grabbed her notepad, her stomach churning with a mixture of dread and anticipation. When she entered the room, she found it empty except for Conrad and the HR director. The blinds were drawn, casting the room in a shadowy, oppressive gloom. Sit down, Conrad said, not bothering to look up from the document he was reading. Brielle sat, her hands clasped tightly in her lap to stop them from shaking. We've reviewed your performance regarding the subway incident, Conrad began. His voice was detached, clinical, the voice of a man discussing a bad investment. While your initiative was noted, the inaccuracies in your reporting have caused significant issues. Inaccuracies? Brielle countered, her voice trembling with indignation. I wrote what you told me to write. Conrad looked up, his eyes cold and dead. And that was your mistake. Blind obedience is not a defense against incompetence. He slid a paper across the table. It was a demotion notice. Effective immediately, you are reassigned to the archives basement. No access to the news floor. And your probationary status is under review. We may not be able to keep you on. The humiliation washed over her, hot and stinging, like a slap in the face. This is punishment for the audit, isn't it? She asked, her voice rising. You're making me the scapegoat for the financial mess. Conrad smiled, a thin, cruel slash of lips. I am protecting this company, Brielle. Collateral damage is unavoidable. He stood up, signaling the end of the meeting. Clear your desk. Security will escort you out. Brielle stood up, her legs feeling weak, but her anger burning bright. She walked out of the conference room, the HR director following silently behind. As she entered the newsroom, the entire floor went quiet, watching her. She went to her desk, shoving her personal items into a cardboard box. The whispers started again, louder this time, pitying and judgmental. Guess she wasn't the golden girl after all. Conrad eats his own. Should have known. She felt the tears prick her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. She lifted her head high, carrying her box past the rows of desks. Conrad stood on the balcony above, watching her leave, a glass of wine in his hand. He had broken her publicly, stripping her of the prestige he had given her. But as she walked toward the elevator, she felt a strange sense of freedom. She was out of the cage. She was in the basement, but she was no longer under his direct eye. She had the sealed letter, and now she had nothing left to lose. The demotion wasn't an end, it was a relocation to the trenches. How much damage could she do from the archives, the graveyard of the network secrets? The elevator doors opened, and she stepped in, leaving the light behind. The basement was a labyrinth of dust and silence, smelling of old paper and neglect. Brielle spent her days sorting through discarded footage and print articles that never made the cut. It was monotonous work, but it offered her something the newsroom didn't time to think. She combed through the archives, cross-referencing the names in the sealed letter. Every vendor, every shell company, had a paper trail buried somewhere in these boxes. 2 weeks into her exile, the call came. Conrad's voice was tight with forced control. Be in Studio A in 1 hour. Hair and makeup first. You're going back on air. Brielle felt a chill run down her spine. For what? Damage control. The subway worker is causing a stir. We need to clarify the narrative. She knew what that meant. She was going to be forced to double down on the lie. She was prepped quickly, the makeup artist coating her in a mask of perfection. Look sad, but resolute, the director instructed. You were misled, but you stand by the network's mission. The red light blinked on, and the anchor turned to her. Brielle, recent reports have cast doubt on the initial findings of the subway investigation. Do you have a statement for the families affected and the viewers at home? Brielle looked into the lens, seeing the millions of eyes staring back at her. She gripped the edge of the desk, her knuckles white. Conrad stood just off camera, his arms crossed, his eyes boring into her soul. She thought of Kieran in his cell, the letter in her purse, the aunt in the hospital. She opened her mouth, the words of the apology written on the teleprompter scrolling by. I want to apologize, she began, her voice shaking. But the words tasted like poison, and she couldn't force them down. She looked at Conrad, then back at the camera, a sudden, reckless courage taking hold. "I apologize for not looking hard enough. For not seeing the truth hidden in the numbers." The teleprompter operator froze, the scrolling text stopping abruptly. "The narrative of a lone saboteur is incomplete. The evidence suggests a systemic failure." Conrad stepped forward, his face purple with rage, signaling to cut the feed. "But the network," the anchor started, panic in her voice. "Is committed to finding that truth," Brielle interrupted, her voice gaining strength. "Even if it leads us to places we are afraid to go." The screen went black, the feed cut violently. Brielle sat in the silence of the dark studio, her heart hammering against her ribs. She had defied him. On live TV. In front of millions. There would be no coming back from this. The war had just begun. What would Conrad do to her now that she had publicly broken his script? The aftermath of the broadcast was immediate and terrifying. Security escorted her not to the basement, but to Conrad's office, then down to the sub-basement editing bay. It was a windowless room filled with monitors, a digital dungeon where footage was manipulated. Conrad was waiting, along with two large men who looked like they were hired for violence, not security. "You had one script, Brielle." "One," Conrad hissed, pacing the small room. "Do you think your little stunt makes you a hero? It makes you a liability." He motioned to the screens, which displayed the footage of her broadcast. "We can edit this. Spin it as a mental breakdown. Stress-induced confusion. But you need to learn that actions have consequences." He nodded to one of the men, who stepped forward and grabbed Brielle's arm. She struggled, but his grip was like iron, bruising her skin. "Let go of me!" She screamed, her voice echoing in the soundproof room. Conrad leaned in, his face inches from hers. "Your aunt. Nice facility. Very expensive. It would be a tragedy if her insurance was revoked. Or if her care was accidentally delayed." Brielle froze, the threat hitting her with the force of a physical blow. "You wouldn't." "I am a businessman, Brielle. I protect my assets. You are no longer an asset." He turned to the editor sitting in the corner, a pale, trembling man. "Roll the doctored footage. I want her to see what we're going to air instead." The screen flickered, showing a version of her apology, spliced and diced to make her look unhinged. It was a masterpiece of deception, a betrayal of reality itself. "This is what the world will see. You, losing your mind. You, the unreliable narrator. And if you ever speak of the sealed letter, or the audit, or Kieran Holt." He let the threat hang in the air, heavy and suffocating. The man holding her shoved her into a chair, the impact knocking the wind out of her. Conrad smoothed his suit, his composure returning as if nothing had happened. "Sign the non-disclosure agreement. Agree to the psychiatric leave. Or your aunt dies tonight." He placed a pen on the table. The screens glowed like knives, cutting away her dignity. Brielle looked at the pen, then at the monster standing before her. He had broken her spirit, threatened her family, and now he was asking for her surrender. But as she looked at the screen, she saw something in the background of the footage. A reflection in the studio glass. A figure standing in the shadows. It was Kieran. Or someone who looked exactly like him. He wasn't in a cell. He was here. The realization sparked a tiny flame of hope in the darkness of her despair. She picked up the pen, pretending to submit, her mind racing with a new plan. She would sign, but she would not break. She would play the part until she could strike back. Was Kieran really in the building, or was it just a hallucination born of desperation? Brielle walked out of the building under the guise of medical leave, a fragile broken thing. But as soon as she turned the corner, she dropped the act, her spine straightening. The reflection on the screen had been real. Kieran was free, and he was close. She found him in a diner across the street, wearing a hoodie and a cap, looking inconspicuous. He slid into the booth opposite her, his eyes intense and searching. "You shouldn't have come back," he said, his voice rougher than she remembered. "They have everything. The footage, the narrative." "We have the notebook," Brielle countered, pulling the sealed letter from her bag. "And I have the archives. I found the connection between Titan Logistics and the network." She pushed the letter across the table. "This matches your logs. It's the same money trail." Kieran looked at the letter, a flicker of admiration in his eyes. "The night," he muttered. "I didn't know who sent it. But now it makes sense. They want us to take the fall so the real players walk away." "Not this time," Brielle said, her voice hard with resolve. "Conrad is going down. We need to time it with the town hall meeting. The live broadcast tomorrow night. Conrad is going to unveil the reformed safety protocols. He's going to use my breakdown as the catalyst." Kieran nodded, his mind working through the logistics. "If we can interrupt the feed with the raw data, the audit numbers, and the notebook. We need to be in the control room," Brielle said. "I know the backup codes from the archives. It's risky. If we fail, we go to prison for sabotage." Kieran reached across the table, taking her hand in his. His grip was warm and calloused. "Prison is better than living on our knees. Are you ready?" Brielle looked at him, seeing the man behind the mugshot, the warrior behind the grease. "I was ready the moment he threatened my aunt." They spent the night planning, synchronizing their watches, and preparing the digital payload. The bait was set. The trap was laid. Conrad thought he had won, that he had cowed them into submission. He was expecting a beaten dog, not a wolf in sheep's clothing. The revenge would be total, public, and irrevocable. Tomorrow night, the world would see the man behind the curtain. And Brielle would finally clear the name of the man she had helped to slander. The clock ticked down, the seconds marching toward the moment of truth. Could they really pull this off against a man who owned the airwaves? The town hall was packed, a sea of shareholders, reporters, and city officials. Conrad stood on the stage, bathed in the spotlight, looking like a savior of the city. He spoke of integrity, of safety, of the difficult decisions made for the greater good. "We were misled by a troubled employee, but we have corrected the course." The big screen behind him displayed charts of rising profits and improved safety metrics. Brielle watched from the back of the room, wearing a maintenance uniform she had stolen. She signaled to Kieran, who was in the control room upstairs, ostensibly fixing a faulty panel. The plan was simple. At the stroke of the hour, the main feed would cut. In its place, a video file would play Kieran's notebook, the audit discrepancies, the sealed letter. Conrad was wrapping up his speech, basking in the applause of the sycophants in the front row. "And so, I promise you, transparency is our watchword. We have nothing to hide." Brielle checked her phone. 9:00 p.m. She hit send on the command code she had written in the archives. The screens on the stage flickered. The image of Conrad froze, then dissolved. The room gasped as a new image appeared, a photo of the corroded brake line. Then the next slide, Kieran's notebook entry, dated 3 months prior. Then the next, the financial transfer from the network to Titan Logistics. The room erupted in chaos. Reporters scrambled to their feet, cameras flashing. Conrad turned to the screen, his face twisting in confusion and then pure, unadulterated rage. "Cut it! Cut the feed!" He screamed, but the microphone amplified his panic. The audio track began to play, a recording Conrad had made in a private meeting. "Let it rot. If the line fails, we blame the union. It's cheaper to fix the PR than the tracks." The silence that fell over the room was deafening. It was the smoking gun, the undeniable proof of his guilt and malice. Conrad stood frozen, the spotlight that had been his armor now exposing his rot. The shareholders began to shout, demanding answers, their faces masks of betrayal. The police, who had been stationed at the event for security, began to move toward the stage. Brielle watched from the shadows, her heart soaring as the empire crumbled. The humiliation was absolute. He hadn't just lost, he had been exposed as a murderer. Kieran joined her at the back of the room, slipping out of his staff disguise. "We did it," he whispered, his hand finding hers in the darkness. "Not yet," she said, watching Conrad being handcuffed on stage. "The courtroom is next. We have to finish it." But for now, the victory tasted sweet, like cool water in a desert. The tyrant had fallen, and the truth had finally spoken its name. Would the public forgive the network, or would they burn it to the ground? The courtroom was cold and sterile, the marble pillars echoing the gravity of the proceedings. Conrad sat at the defendant's table, his suit expensive but rumpled, his eyes weary. He was charged with embezzlement, negligence, and manslaughter. The prosecution was relentless, using the evidence from the town hall to flay him alive. Brielle sat in the gallery, her hands clasped tightly together, waiting for her turn to testify. Conrad's lawyer, a shark in a gray suit, stood up to cross-examine her. "Miss Camden, isn't it true that you accepted money from Mr. Ashbourne? A private arrangement?" Brielle nodded, her voice steady. "Yes. For my aunt's medical bills. And isn't it true that you were angry about your demotion? That you sought revenge?" "I was angry, but I didn't seek revenge. I sought the truth." The lawyer smiled, a predatory glint in his eyes. "The truth? Or a payout?" He pulled a document from his briefcase and held it up. "This is a confidentiality agreement signed by a shell company linked to Kieran Holt. It states that in exchange for the sealed letter, he would receive 50% of the lawsuit settlement." The murmurs in the gallery were loud. The trap had been sprung. Conrad had manufactured evidence to implicate Kieran in a scheme to sell the truth. "Miss Camden, did you know your partner was planning to profit from this tragedy?" Brielle looked at Kieran, who sat stoically, his eyes never leaving hers. She knew the document was a forgery. Kieran didn't care about money. But the seed of doubt had been planted in the jury's mind. Conrad's lawyer pressed on. This wasn't about justice. It was about a shakedown. The judge banged his gavel. "Order." Brielle stood up, her legs trembling. "Objection. He's lying." "Sit down, Miss Camden," the judge warned. She looked at Conrad, who was watching her with a smug, victorious smile. He had manipulated the narrative again, turning heroes into mercenaries. The ultimatum was clear in his eyes: drop the testimony, or I destroy Kieran. If she continued to fight, Kieran would go to prison for extortion. If she stopped, Conrad might walk free on a technicality. The weight of the decision crushed her, the moral test she had feared the most. She looked at Kieran, seeing the slight shake of his head. He was willing to take the fall if it meant she was safe. But she couldn't let him. Not after everything they had done. She took a breath, gathering every ounce of courage she had left. She had to turn the trap back on the trapper. She reached into her bag and pulled out the original envelope of the sealed letter. "Your Honor," she said, her voice ringing clear. "I can prove that document is a fake. And I can prove exactly who sent me this letter." The courtroom fell silent. Conrad's smile faltered. The final card was about to be played. Was she ready to reveal the hand that had dealt it? Brielle approached the bench, the envelope in her hand. "This letter was sent to me anonymously. But the signature. It's not a name." She opened the envelope and pulled out a single card with a crest embossed in gold. "This is the seal of the Ashbourne Family Trust. Specifically, the branch that was disinherited 20 years ago." She turned to face the courtroom, her eyes locking onto Conrad's. "Kieran Holt isn't just a maintenance worker. He is Kieran Ashbourne. Conrad's younger brother." The gasp in the room was sucked out of the air, a vacuum of shock. Conrad shot to his feet, his face pale. Lies. He's a bastard. A nobody. Brielle continued, her voice trembling with the power of the revelation. When their father died, the will left the controlling interest of the network to the younger son. But Conrad, the eldest, hid the will, bribed the lawyers, and banished Kieran. Kieran took the name Holt, their mother's maiden name, and went into hiding. He worked in the tunnels because that was the only place Conrad wouldn't look for him. She held up the letter. This letter wasn't from a stranger. It was from the family lawyer, confirming Kieran's identity. The audit wasn't just financial. It was a search for the lost heir. Kieran stood up slowly, shedding the coat of the maintenance worker. He stood taller, his posture changing, the mask of the poor man falling away. Conrad, he said, his voice commanding the room. You didn't just embezzle funds. You stole my life. You stole the company. And you killed those people to cover your tracks. Conrad slumped back into his chair, defeated by the blood he had tried to deny. The judge looked at the documents, verifying the crest and the accompanying notarized will. It was valid. Kieran Holt was the legal owner of the Ashbourne media empire. The irony was suffocating. The saboteur was the victim. The victim was the thief. Brielle looked at Kieran, seeing the man he was meant to be. He hadn't done this for the money. He had done it to stop the bleeding. The identity reveal reframed everything: the sabotage, the blackmail, the sealed letter. It had never been a rich versus poor story. It was a story of a king exiled by a tyrant. And now, the true king had returned to claim his broken throne. The jury didn't even need to retire. The verdict was written in the shock on their faces. Guilty on all counts. Conrad was led away, screaming accusations, his world utterly annihilated. Kieran turned to Brielle, his eyes filled with a complex mix of triumph and sorrow. He had won, but the cost had been nearly everything. What kind of king would he be, forged in the grime of the subway tunnels? The headquarters of Ashbourne Media felt different under the new management. The cold, polished aesthetic was gone, replaced by warmer tones and open spaces. Brielle sat in Kieran's office, the CEO's office, watching him sign documents. He wore a suit now, tailored perfectly, but he still had the grease stain on his knuckle, a refusal to forget where he came from. You don't have to stay, Kieran said, looking up from the desk. You can go anywhere. Write your own stories. Brielle smiled, a sad, soft expression. I know. But I want to stay here. Fix what we broke. The romance between them had changed. It was no longer the desperate, aching need of two people in the fire. It was quieter now, bruised but enduring. They had seen the worst in each other and survived. I'm reinstating you as head investigative journalist, Kieran said, sliding a folder across the desk. Full autonomy. No more scripts. No more cages. Brielle took the folder, her fingers brushing against his. And your aunt? Kieran asked gently. She's in the best wing. Paid for. For life. Thank you, she whispered. For everything. They stood there for a moment, the silence heavy with the things they couldn't say. The trauma of the betrayal, the fear of the dungeon, the humiliation of the gala. Those scars would remain, a roadmap of the battle they had fought. I'm not the man my father was, Brielle. And I'm certainly not the man Conrad is. But I can't be the maintenance worker anymore either. You're Kieran, she said simply. You're the man who saved the city with a notebook. He walked around the desk, pulling her into a hug that was hesitant at first, then tight. It wasn't a fairy tale ending. They were both damaged by the war they had waged. But as they looked out the window at the city, the lights didn't look like a trap anymore. They looked like a challenge. A story that was still being written. Let's go get dinner, Kieran said. Someplace greasy. Someplace real. Brielle laughed, the sound breaking the tension of the room. "Only if you let me pay this time." "Deal." They walked out of the office together, not as a boss and employee, or a prince and a pauper, but as two survivors, walking hand in hand into the messy, beautiful truth. The love was there, transformed by the fire, stronger for the burning. And the story of the sealed letter was finally, truly closed. Or was it just the beginning of a new chapter? The dust has settled on the Ashbourne Empire, but the echoes of the scandal still linger in the hallways of power. Brielle and Kieran prove that truth is a weapon that can't be locked away, no matter how thick the walls or how expensive the lawyers. Their journey was a brutal testament to the cost of integrity, a reminder that fighting the giants often leaves you scarred. Yet, in those scars, we find the strength to stand up again, to demand better from the world and from ourselves. The romance that blossomed in the dark is not a perfect flower, but it is real, rooted in shared survival and mutual respect. We invite you to join this community of truth seekers, to subscribe and become part of the ongoing story that challenges the status quo. If you believe in justice, in love that endures the test of fire, please like this video and share it with those who need to hear it. Leave a comment below and tell us how you would have faced the ultimatum. Don't forget to turn on notifications so you never miss when the next chapter drops. Stay vigilant, stay human, and keep watching closely.